Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today I've got Matt with me. Hi Matt.
How's it going?
Good. Matt, I came across this fantastic submission on LinkedIn the other day from various people to Bill Shorten and the government that I thought we needed to discuss. It's very important to the SDA world. It is in relation to the recommendations in the NDIS review that came out back in December, recommendation 9.4, that the Improved Liveability SDA category should be removed. Now, at the time, Matt, if you remember, this caused a lot of concern, a lot of consternation, a lot of discussion. And obviously, if you haven't listened to the episode, or I think we did a couple of episodes.
We did, yes. Yep.
Yeah, talking about this and the potential implications and what it could mean.
So the original recommendation 9.4, I'll just read it out for people who are not aware. The recommendation is that the National Disability Insurance Agency, or NDIA, should remove the Improved Liveability category for new Specialist Disability Accommodation developments and review the remaining SDA categories and associated design standards to evaluate their effectiveness.
Yeah, so obviously given that back in June when the price review came out for SDA and the incomes on improved livability properties were increased drastically, which indicated to us a real push for people to develop more IL. This came as a real shock.
Yes, yep.
So, yeah. And we are aware of various recommendations and presentations and submissions that have been put together. And this is one that was actually dated March. So it is a little while ago, but it's only just something that's come across our desk. And I thought this would be really useful for us to explain to potential investors who might have the jitters about the idea of investing in SDA in general, but also particularly in IL.
I feel like we've been asked, a few people have asked us our thoughts on this recommendation and whether it will come to fruition, in what form it will take. But yeah, this is just kind of obviously a submission to elaborate on potential outcomes of following through with this recommendation and why it should not be followed through with.
Sure, yeah. So the submission that we're talking about was actually put together by SDA Services. Some of our listeners may be familiar with Greg Barry, who was a guest speaker on one of our episodes in the past, and also another organisation called SDA Plus, who are an SDA provider. They put together this submission and with the assistance of and the support of a whole bunch of industry people, including, I'm just going to name a few names here of people that we know or are aware of in the industry, people like Alicia Rathbone from Housing Hub, Alison McLeod from NHAB, Amber Hoy from Aruma, Brett Woolger, DSC, Brendan Wolf and Brad Fuller from Brighter Living, David Whitelaw from Adapt Housing, Greg Johnson, Young Care, Bruce Bromley from Equal Access, Taryn Thompson, who is actually a solicitor working in Adelaide for very much concentrating in the SDA world at the moment. Hi, Taryn, if you're listening. So, look, this is some pretty big punches in the SDA world who have come together to really support this submission. So
we've got 65 people have come together. So these are people who are saying to the government basically, no, don't do it. Don't remove IL.
And so I thought we should just touch on what the messages were in this submission. There's basically 5 points that they've listed that they state the main reasons why it shouldn't. So I might just go through those and then we could talk about each point in a little bit more detail. So point number 1, acceptance of the recommendation would be unfair for SDA IL eligible NDIS participants, and the removal of this existing quality safe support will cause high-risk consequences and will have harmful effects. So, yeah, Matt, can you maybe go into...
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, if you say that all people are equal and someone's got FA or HBS funding and they get to keep their funding and keep what they currently have in terms of their lived experience and their accommodation, but then someone who might be in a very similar situation or, has a similar lifestyle is just cut from essentially their accommodation and their SDA. Obviously, that's not really fair, and maybe this needs. It goes into one of these other points that there perhaps needs to be more data. There needs to be more of an informed process on decision making here. But just from the get go, it seems very unfair that certain people would be deemed to not require SDA when, for all purposes, they might be, apart from requiring a wheelchair, for instance, they might be in a very similar situation in terms of the supports they require.
Yeah, for sure. And it specifically states here that NDIS participants that meet SDA eligibility criteria have been given that because they have extreme functional impairment and or very high support needs. Now, just because IL participants don't necessarily have physical ambulant issues doesn't mean that they don't have extremely high or very high support needs and functional impairment. So it is very unfair. And there's just some quotes that were noted here, samples of statements made by some of the contributors. The first one here, getting rid of IL is hugely discriminatory for people with cognitive impairments compared to people with physical limitations. My homeless guys in inner city Sydney tick every box except that they can walk. So, yeah, this is just a really important point to understand that SDA doesn't mean that they have physical limitations and that FA and I and HPS are the only categories. Obviously, we're not talking about robust here. It's a completely separate thing. But people, and the majority of SDA participants at the moment are people with IL.
Yeah,
and
which would be a huge change. It's not as if it's a small category by any means or a small contingent of people.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, so on to the second point. IL manifests value for money for the NDIS, and additionally, it provides other cost savings for your government as well as for states and territories governments.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's proven to be, it's a substantial decrease in a lot of cases for potential costs for the government, and also represents on the other side a way to stimulate the economy. So to kind of just do away with that, and that would, I feel like, there's been a lot of kind of shake-ups in the NDIS and in SDA, but this would be a huge shake-up where you'd have a lot of people who are out of work, and on the other hand, you'd have a lot of people who would be in a better position if they were in an SDA house where they have the supports and a purpose-built property that's suited to their needs, relying on external help at the cost of the government, which would otherwise, I think we were speaking to Kim Johnson the other day, and she was talking on kind of how if an SDA house is properly purpose-built, it alleviates some of the support needs for a participant.
Oh, it can alleviate a lot of them.
They have the ability to function without the necessarily as much care as they would in a setting where they don't have that, which is something a lot of people, I suppose, might not be aware of.
That's kind of the whole point of SDA is to provide them with more independence to do more things on their own.
Yeah. But I suppose just going through to the actual financial benefit of that is maybe not on paper, but it's huge. And kind of to do away with that without kind of considering the economic implications and how that would change things in a huge way, considering that, as you mentioned, Debbie, that IL is such a big component of SDA, I think is a bit haphazard.
Yeah, and also under this point too, they're referring back to basically the whole point of the SDA scheme, part of the NDIS. And it says here, it's also noteworthy that the NDIA is only able to approve individual participants for IL SDA if that support represents value for money in that individual's particular circumstances. And as I already talked about at the beginning, the last year's SDA pricing review recognised this and added more SDA value across the board for all property types. So for them to turn around and say that it does not represent money goes against completely everything that the NDIA has done in terms of approving IL participants for SDA in the first place.
Yep.
Really, yeah. So they got that bang on. Point number 3. Consideration of any change to IL, including its removal, is not currently informed by enough information, including from engagement with participants. This is such an important thing.
This is so important.
The independent review has recommended a co-design process, SDA data collection, and a design categories review. Consideration of IL's future would benefit greatly from and should await the outcome of these initiatives. Well, yeah, and we have said it over and over again. Data is just not good enough.
Yep.
And as it says here, the co-design process has not yet commenced. So how can they put this recommendation forward when they've got no kind of, inkling of what is actually needed by the participants, by the providers?
And I feel like, this has been an ongoing thing, but the kind of how much there's been changes in the NDIS has not helped this situation, and continuing to make changes without enough, data coming through to actually make an informed decision, it just further complicates the process in determining positive outcomes and efficiency and effectiveness of strategies around potential changes to SDA and how SDA works, particularly in the case of IL in this case.
Yeah, for sure. Touched on, in which we didn't discuss in one of the earlier points, was the fact that a lot of people with IL funding are currently residing in the legacy and the group homes, which we know are being defunded and phased out. So just one of the comments here from one of the supporters and people involved in this submission is, if IL is removed, what are the alternate pathways for participants funded for shared care support seeking to progress out of basic and legacy homes? Yeah, where are they going to go? Seriously. I know there was talk about a new category of SDA being brought in. Is it just a way for the NDIS to say, oh, look, 40% of SDA participants have IL. We don't think they need it. Let's bump down the income we pay for them and put them into a lower category. I don't know, but it doesn't seem thought out properly.
Going back to one of your points you made earlier, Debbie, just about how it's for extreme functional impairment, and to then just go on the back of that and say, oh, well, maybe they don't need it.
Yeah.
I don't really, I feel like there's a lot of, it just doesn't seem like it matches up to the original intention around IL.
Yeah, precisely. So point number 4. The fact that there are proposed changes to the National Construction Code is not a valid or relevant consideration for the recommendation. So this is really interesting because there has been a lot of talk in recent times about the contradictions between parts of the NCC, parts of the LHA, Livable Housing Australia requirements, and the fact that neither of those kind of really match the SDA design guidelines, and the fact that IL is kind of matching the LHI guidelines, but essentially it doesn't. The IL design is far superior to the LHA requirements.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you get?
I just think it's kind of not really, it's a bit of a straw man argument. It's not really relevant to, we're talking about IL here, not the construction code. So whether or not that changes doesn't alleviate what needs to be done in terms of participants' best interest and in making sure the industry performs as effectively as possible.
Yeah. One of the comments from a submission here was the ABCB, the Australian Building Codes Board, has always held a line that it will never regulate building fit out. If we lose IL, where are these people going to go? NCC doesn't consider what the supports needs of these participants is going to be. We know that state regulations aren't going to pick it up. We know that local jurisdictions aren't looking into this. there are large areas within Australia where there is simply going to be no housing that's going to be minimally accessible. Without IL, we're going to have a significant cohort of people who will be rendered homeless. The functional role that SDA settings deliver for the delivery of support, these settings are first and foremost people's homes. At the same time, if the supports are being shared, we actually, as a provider, need an environment that our staff can work in compliance with the award requirements, which are the provision of their own bathroom. One of the challenges that we perpetually face in private rentals, we are paying for the cost of the provision of required facilities for staff. Unsafe and inappropriate settings for support staff. That's a really important point. Super important. So, yeah, bringing in the NCC codes, it's kind of not relevant.
And as well as that, it's kind of like, they've said that they wanted to change this for a long time, and, it might be a long time yet that they want to do this for. And, people who right now need housing, it's kind of, it's kind of a bit of a slap in the face.
Yeah, big time. So on to the final point, number 5. The fact of the recommendation and that a decision for it is awaited is having a harmful effect upon SDA investment confidence broadly. Yes, totally agree.
100%.
Acceptance of the recommendation would see institutional capital leave the sector with unsophisticated, oftentimes poor quality operations remaining. Yeah, look, we've seen that from the beginning since this recommendation came out. The investor confidence has definitely been shaken. We get this question a lot, why would I bother to invest in an IL property when it may be removed? What's going to happen if I have an IL property? So, yeah, it's been a big issue.
At the end of the day, in most cases, we think that it will be grandfathered, so it will continue operating as an IL if it's currently before these changes occurred. Yeah, that doesn't give any confidence to people who are in the future thinking of investing in an SDA category or looking towards the future of SDA and its consistency. So this is I feel that this is so big for investors and just the industry as a whole and looking towards the future. Yeah.
And back to the contributions here on this point, I'll just summarise a bit of this. SDA requires $5 to $8 billion of private sector capital to build the market that's required. And, in the initial guidelines for SDA, the government has said we are not in a position to fund the development. Hence, we will incentivise private investment by the paying of these favourable SDA incomes.
Yep.
So the government wants private investment, full stop. That was how this all came about. So this recommendation had a huge confidence impact on investors. The sentiment that is already being expressed in terms of complete withdrawal from this market is because of constant government policy shifts. If there isn't clarity, people will just say, no, I'll go and invest in other real estate asset classes. It really does shock people when they're looking at allocating capital. And for a lot of people, this is their life savings. And obviously they're not going to have the confidence to go ahead when the government keeps changing their mind. So, yeah, at the end of this, it says if investors aren't confident, then participants don't get the outcomes. And look,
lose. Yep.
This is what it's all about. The participants need these homes. And yes, this is a really complex area, but the government or whoever it was that created these recommendations for the in the review back in December, it's just really badly thought out in terms of the consequences that review, and in particular, there was a lot of very controversial points in the review, but, this definitely was one of them for the SDA sector. So, look, that's the overview of this submission that went to the government and to Bill Shorten. I hope that gives you a bit more of an idea of the SDA world. And we're not talking about, just people like ourselves, but, everyone, the providers, the participants, everyone who is involved in some level of the development of SDA around Australia has been really concerned about this. And you can see they've all gotten behind this to say to the government, listen, this is something you really should not take up. You should not consider this recommendation. It will be so harmful to the industry and to the participants at the end of the day.
And just I suppose it just says here, the group respectfully asks to resolve to not accept the recommendation, to consider participant stress and investment confidence, and that you advise on the resolution. You recommend that there'll be no changes at all made to IL, at least until enough information is gathered where we can actually make an informed decision around the processes and how that would actually work. So, yet again, more data would assist with hopefully a decision around this.
Yeah. I was actually at a conference a few months back in Sydney. I was on a panel with some speakers, and I'm unfortunately can't remember the gentleman's name, where he was from, but we were talking about this very issue, and he has a lot of experience in government submissions and recommendation reviews in different areas of government. And he says, and this gave me a lot of confidence at the time, he said what he has seen over decades with governments reviewing these recommendations is very few of the recommendations actually do get taken up.
Yep.
So when there's one as contentious as this, our opinion is it's not going to happen. So, but it is still a wait and see situation at the moment until the government do come back with their report on the recommendations. Now, they only just recently came back with their report on the Royal Commission findings, which was released, if I remember, Matt, a couple of months before the NDIS review.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, look, hopefully that Royal Commission was far broader than the NDIS review. So I would hope that, they've had time also to review that NDIS review recommendations and will come. They've already actually actioned some of those recommendations in terms of amending legislation, but in terms of the overall review, they haven't come back and said, yes, no to the various points in it. So let's hope it comes really soon and we'll have more clarity on where we stand moving forward with SDA.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, thanks, Matt.
No worries.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.